Welcome back to Razmafsar TV. I am really happy to have Miles Whining here back on our channel. Hi, Miles. How are you doing today?
I'm good, sir. It's an honor to be back on again and to represent the CLAO report here as well.
Thank you very much. As we saw, and you know that Miles wrote a very powerful, in a way powerful and very interesting book on his experiences in Afghanistan as a combat veteran of the US Army and Marines. And now I'm going, because he has, as we say, he has experiences on the ground. So I'm going to ask him about the small arms, what is used on the ground by four different let's say units: American Army and Afghan police, and then also Afghan military and Taliban. So Miles, let us start. You can pick among these four whatever you prefer to start with.
So I would start with the US side, because the US side is actually the basis for understanding the Afghan army side, and later on the Afghan police side, because the US primarily equipped the Afghan army with US small arms, and later on the Afghan police. So if you can understand the US basis, that was what the Afghan army is based upon. So it makes it a little bit easier later on as well. So in terms of what the US side is equipped with in terms of small arms at the infantry level that I was dealing with, we were mostly equipped with the 5.56 millimeter M4, M4A1, M16A4 pattern of rifles and carbines. For our light machine guns, we had the M27, the Heckler and Koch M27, and the M249 SAW, or squad automatic weapon. And for medium machine gun, or general purpose machine gun, that is known as the M240 Bravo, with a non-adjustable gas setting. And then we also had 50 caliber machine guns that we mostly had on our trucks and on our vehicles, in addition to Mark 19s, which were 40 millimeter grenade launchers. And then we also had the snipers, which would come along on some patrols, which had their 7.62 millimeter M40 A6 rifles. And then they also had their Barrett, or 50 caliber Barrett Sasser special application scoped rifle, or rifles. And then in addition, they also had the M110 semi-automatic rifles, or SAS is what they were called, semi-automatic sniper system or something. So what the Afghan army used was essentially variants and derivatives of what we had. So many of the Afghan soldiers had M16A2s, which were older variants of the M16A4. So the same rifle, it's the same platform. The operating system is the same. In addition to that, for their light machine guns, they had the M249 SAW, the same thing we had. For their medium machine guns, they had the M240. For their heavy machine guns, they had the 50 caliber M2. And then for grenade launchers, the Afghan army, I rarely saw with 40 millimeter Mark 19 grenade launchers, but I'm not too sure about that as well. For sniper systems, for long range precision rifles, they used the M24, which is a military designation of the Remington 700 bolt action precision rifle, and which is also a US Army Marine Corps derivative rifle, which the US Army and Marine Corps still use today as the M24 or the M40 A6. Now, so just to pause on the Afghan army, the ANA, Afghan National Army, or Afghan Milli Ordu in Pashto, and the US Army, US Marines, having these weapon systems as common to each other, there was less of it really was less of a concern of logistics. And so technically, yes, you could share ammunition with each other if you really needed to, if you're caught in a bind. But at the end of the day, the logistics of the two sides was never stretched to that limit that you could actually share ammunition. So ammunition commonality wasn't really a priority, in my opinion. Now, what weapon systems did the Afghan army have that the US military did not have? Well, the Afghan army made extensive use of the RPG, or otherwise known as colloquially known as a rocket. In Pashto or Dari, they'd simply call it a rocket. But the RPG was quite fond of by both the Afghan army and the Afghan police, and the Afghan Taliban as well. Yeah, everyone likes a good RPG.
What's the reason they like RPG? What's the reason?
RPGs are very simple to use. They're also very effective if you know how to use them. You can carry a lot of rockets and one launcher. Multiple guys in a squad can carry rockets as well. Within 100 to 200 to 300 meters, they can be very effective if you know how to employ them accurately, and you know how to use the safety cable. They're very easy. They're very low tech, easy to use weapon system, and that's why you can train an illiterate, uneducated peasant how to use an RPG 7. It's not that hard at all. I mean, you've got a push bolt safety that pushes left to right. You've got the safety mechanisms on the rocket. You have to screw the rocket into the booster. You have to stick it into the actual launcher, and then there's a hammer that you have to cock and you fire. It's very simple. As opposed to, some of the US systems, which, for example, they have lettering on them, and let's say the US Law rocket or the light anti-tank weapon system, I believe it was the Law rocket or the AT-4, for example. These are a little bit more complex in that, there's single rounds of ammunition. In terms of what we had that was equivalent to the RPG, we had these very expensive alternatives, such as the Carl Gustav, or colloquially referred to as a Charlie G. In addition to something called the Small, which is an old Marine Corps technology from actually, I believe in the 1980s or 90s or so, the Small, which again is complicated to use compared to a RPG. You actually have a spotting round that you can use with it, so these systems get a little bit more complicated. So that's something that the ANA had that we did not have, that we actually looked favorably upon them because they issued those RPGs out fairly regularly, and if we had an RPG, it actually wouldn't be a bad look in comparison of what other weapon systems we had. So
okay, thank you very much. And then could you please also tell us a bit about why so many different small arms are carried by American military there? What's the reason that there are so many different small arms carried?
It comes down to the task organization and how it essentially, just like any military in the world, in terms of task organization, right? In terms of, how, in terms of your doctrine and your support elements, and how do you, because it goes back to doctrine, right? And that, how does the military decide how they're going to defeat or take an enemy position at the infantry small unit level, right? And every military has different answers for that. And you often see, when looking at the organization of different militaries and different infantry units, you see with the weapon systems, you see how heavy or how light they are, how much extra ammunition they are, and you also see that reflected back into the organizational culture and procurement of these weapon systems of, our organization needs to be able to achieve this amount in this time. So for example, with the Marine Corps, with the M27, right? There's M27 is mired in controversy for a variety of different reasons, but essentially it was a lightweight machine gun compared to the belt-fed machine gun that we previously had, the SAW. And one of the reasons for it was that in Afghanistan, we needed better positive identification of our targets, because oftentimes there was civilians mixed in with the enemy and we needed a more precise way of identifying who actually we were shooting at. That was one reason for the M27. The other reason for that, or the other reason for the M27 was to keep soldiers and to keep Marines more nimble on patrol and be able to move quicker and not have to have an A barrel, not have to have all the baggage that a saw sort of implies. Because you do have a lot of baggage with the saw. You have to have a spare barrel, you have to have spare cleaning components, you have to have additional maintenance and care, you have to have additional rounds of ammunition, but that just goes back to doctrinally, because previously we were using the M249 saw where each fire team was built up around the saw, which the saw is a bipod mounted belt fed weapon, open bolt weapon system, which lends itself very well to sort of grand scheme, sweeping assaults across enemy territory where you need to take an objective across a field, or, you need to work in, through open areas. But when it comes to urban warfare, when it comes to fighting, especially in Afghanistan, with dealing with the kind of precision shots that we needed it to take, the saw just wasn't cutting it. In urban warfare, for example, the saw was at a disadvantage. You can't, for example, storm, if you want to storm a room, there's a maxim: you never storm a room, or you never initiate an ambush with an open bolt weapon system, because that open bolt system has a larger chance of malfunctioning. So you never want to storm a room or initiate an ambush with a saw. So that leads to, issues of, and plus with a saw is such an unwieldy, huge light machine gun. And so you don't want to have that guy going first into a confined space, which is never a good idea. But in M27, you could easily storm a room with that, right? So this just goes into more of these ideas of doctrine, whereas, the experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan led to the push towards these more lighter, more compact weapons where we didn't need all this crazy firepower. And the idea was that we needed more accurate and well-placed firepower, as opposed to a garden hose of 5.56 rounds coming out of the end of a muzzle, right? So that was one example of, one tiny microcosm of, them 249, why doctrinally how it has existed within the infantry. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, just out of curiosity, I don't want to change the topic away from Afghanistan to Iraq. So did I understand you correctly that Afghanistan and Iraq, as far as responses were concerned, share some characteristics as far as your needs, what kind of small arms you should have carried in both battlefields?
Yeah, both needed lighter, more compact stuff. Iraq for the reasons of the urban fighting, Afghanistan for the reasons of vehicle-mounted warfare, of walking long distances and carrying more gear. It was a lighter weapon, was definitely useful in both circumstances, right? And this is where you see the transition from the U.S. military from the M4, from the M16A4 rifle to the M4 carbine. And nowadays you see that transition begin in Iraq and sort of finish in Afghanistan, where you see many more M4 carbines, and now the M16A4 is being phased out almost completely in the infantry for both services, the Army and the Marines. So
could you please tell our viewers, I know this is a very basic question, as far as infantry is concerned, what are the similarities and differences between infantry and Marines in the U.S. Army?
So both the Army and the Marines have infantry elements, right? Have infantry units. I would maybe do you want to ask what's the difference between the Marines and the Army, or between Army infantry and Marine infantry, or that?
Army infantry and Marine infantry.
So the differences between the Army infantry and the Marine infantry is mainly that the Marine infantry is designed similarly like the rest of the Marine Corps, is much more self-contained and much more independent, and able to do more organically, so to speak. Whereas the army infantry, in terms of doctrine, is designed as a much larger force, right? Is designed to operate the army, as a rule, is an organization that is designed to be, an occupying force, a force of occupation, fight these big wars, these big battles, and fight wars of occupation. Whereas the Marine Corps is designed as this much more mobile, more nimble, able to deploy, strike hard, and then, get out of there for the army to come in and occupy. And you see this reflected in the weapon systems in the organization. And so for things like leadership, right? Whereas in the Marine Corps, we consider, we break it down into fire teams, and you actually have a fire team of 3 Marines in charge of being led by a corporal. In the Marine Corps, we consider the corporal as the lowest echelon, the lowest rung of non-commissioned officer leadership, right? Whereas in the Army, that really doesn't start until the staff sergeant level. Whereas in the Army, you have staff sergeants that lead squads. You have, sergeants and corporals sort of do whatever they want, but they're in charge of different parts of a squad and in parts of there. But whereas in the Marine Corps, we push leadership down to that very basic level of a fire team. And that the reason why is because in the Marine Corps, that fire team could be having a mission all on its own. And that fire team could be standing watch. They could be having an outpost. They could be on their own patrol. You could have a fire team be on its own patrol, right? Whereas in the Army, there is no fire team. There's only a squad at the most basic level. And you have different levels of organization below the squad. But I think the Army has this thing where it's like Alpha team and Bravo team. But it's different than a fire team, because in the Army, I believe it's like their Bravo team in the Army, for example, has the heavy machine gun, has the medium machine gun, which is the 240, right? Going off of like just what the Army's basic doctrine is. Whereas in the Marine Corps, we don't have any medium machine guns at that fire team level, because that medium machine gun will slow us down because it's heavier. So what we have instead is we have a SAW or M27, and that fire team now has that lightweight mobile firepower that it can take with it anywhere. Whereas the Army element, moves as a squad. With the Marine Corps, we can go all the way down to that fire team, and then we can say, that fire team with an NCO at that lowest leadership level, it's like that NCO, he can be entrusted with those 3 men to, go off and complete whatever mission they need to do. And it just builds up from there. And then you have, your fire teams and the squad and stuff like that.
Oh, very interesting. So, I mean, what I hear and what I'm listening to you is just like a clear difference of leadership style between the Marine infantry and the Army infantry. It's very interesting to say that and to hear.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, in the Marine Corps, it's, a sergeant, a sergeant is in charge of a squad. In the Marine Corps. In the Army, a staff sergeant is in charge of a squad. In the Marine Corps, a corporal is in charge of a fire team. In the Army, one of those Bravo teams or whatever is being led by a sergeant. A corporal isn't really a big deal, right? And then we push that down much lower. I mean, we have, a Marine corporal has a very legitimate amount of power within that organizational structure. A corporal can be entrusted with a lot, can be entrusted with a lot of different billets. He can be entrusted with a lot of power. He's given a lot of respect. This is the first rung of Marine Corps leadership, right? I mean, you don't get promoted to a corporal if you have bad leadership skills, if you don't merit the rank, so to speak, right? Whereas in the Army, a corporal and a sergeant do not hold the same power and authority that a Marine corporal and sergeant do. For that reason, that we push that leadership down to that lowest level there.
Miles, because the reason I'm asking you, because as you might know, I teach intercultural management and also leadership. How is good leadership described in Marines? What kind of qualities
We
do
actually, I will tell you, we have a acronym that describes this.
tell me, please?
JJ did tie buckle. It's a very, let me look it up. I'm a Marine sergeant that didn't do his homework. I have a good response for you. JJ did tie. But this also tells you about Marine intelligence. It's not very high, right? So yeah, if you look up, JJ did tie buckle.
Okay.
we need acronyms to remember our leadership traits in the Marine Corps, right? JJ did tie buckle. Justice, judgment, dependability, initiative, decisiveness, tact, integrity, endurance, bearing, unselfishness, courage, knowledge, loyalty, and enthusiasm. That's my acronym answer to your question. But the bigger things about qualities of leadership in the Marine Corps, I think one of the most important qualities is to lead by example. That's like one of the biggest points. Lead by example, and almost everything else comes before that. And in Marine Corps, it's a very big thing. It's like, leaders leading by example and being there, leading patrols, staying with their troops, and that kind of thing. Second, having a sense of mission accomplishment and always going after the mission. That's another big leadership trait in that case. Taking care of the men. There's another very good phrase in the U.S. military called the mission, the men, and me. In that priority as a leader, your first priority is for the mission, the second priority is for the men, the second priority is for yourself. And we do this in weird ways, in odd ways in the Marines. In that, so for example, whenever we eat in the field, like have chow, we call it, and the whole company is going to go eat food, we line up from the lowest rank to the highest, to the most senior in rank. So we say privates and PFCs first. So the captains and the officers and the non-commissioned officers, they eat last in line. So it's the privates and the PFCs, the lowest ranking guys. They line up first to get food, and then you'll see the NCOs after them, the corporals, and then the sergeants, and then the company commander. The guy in charge of everything the company's doing. He's the last one to get food, and the point of that is very distinct. Is to say, and that's drilled into us, from boot camp, from the very first day. Is that the leadership eats last. And the juniors eat first, and that's a point of taking care of your men before yourself, and that illustrates that. And that's not a it's interesting in the Marines, because that's not a sort of a bland statement of like we take care of our men. It's like, no, we actually, even when we eat food, it's like the men come first, the lower ranks come first, kind of thing, in that as a leadership style. So.
Is it the same also in the Army?
I don't know what the Army does. I've never seen the Army eat cow in the field.
No, I was just curious. No problem.
Yeah, I don't know. I actually don't know what they do. I've never heard about it from what the Army does there. So I don't know. Maybe they have officers eat last and everyone else just go eat first. I have no idea, to be honest. And the Army will always try to say, oh, well, we do the same thing in the Army. And it's like, no, you don't, not really. And we always have this inter-service rivalry with that kind of thing.
Okay. And in general, before we go ahead and go back to small arms, could you just help us, our viewers, to understand, we talked about Marine infantry, Army infantry, and in general, could you please tell us what's the difference between the Army and the Marines on a bigger scale?
Yeah, going back to the Army is this, massive, soul-crushing organization. It's just, the Army is humongous. I mean, just to put things in perspective, the Marine Corps has 3 divisions, right? I think the Army has a dozen divisions. And so it's huge. It's just a humongous, it's just a humongous be a month, a monster organization. That's just that you can just get so lost in the sauce. But that's why the Army is like that, right? Because the Army is, at the same time, is continuously has bases in Korea, has bases in Germany. So, the Army can fight this 2-theater war in the Pacific and in Europe, etc. The Marine Corps can't do that. That's not the Marine Corps' mission. And I mean, just an example, it's like, in the Marine Corps is such a small organization, relatively speaking to the Army, that, if I run into an infantry Marine who served in my generation or in my sort of peer group within, post 2010 kind of thing, there's a certain percentage that I might actually know him, but there's a very high percentage that I know someone he knows. Within the Army, you'll almost never know that person, and you might not even know someone he knows, but where in the Marine Corps, you're only 1 or 2 steps removed. Because if I go back and forth with someone, I can say, hey, were you in this unit? I was in this unit. Oh, do you know this guy? Okay, now we have a connection, right? But that rarely ever happens in the Army, because that just gives you a point. It's like, in the Army, it's like, oh, do you know this guy? No. Do you know anyone he knows? No. Do you know anyone this guy knows? No. Because you weren't even in the same unit at all. But even in the Marine Corps, it's like, even though we're on 2 separate coasts, the East Coast and the West Coast, there's still a possibility that we actually know each other as a way to show like points of connection, like how many points removed we are, So.